Some events in history don't just mark time. They literally break it in two. World War I wasn't just another war. It was a global firestorm that completely reshaped our planet. And in the process, it actually created the world we're all living in today. So let's break down how this one single cataclysmic event set the stage for everything that came after.
And we're going to zero in on one really big question. How did this catastrophic European war become the unlikely birthplace of modern America? It's an incredible story of transformation. How did a nation that was so determined to stay out of the fight end up becoming a dominant global superpower?
All right, so to really get its impact, we first have to get a clear picture of the war itself. What exactly was this so-called Great War, and who was fighting who?
Well, for starters, it raged for over 4 incredibly long years. It officially kicked off on July 28, 1914, and didn't stop until the armistice was signed on November 11, 1918. 4 years that must have felt like an absolute century to the people living through it.
For the very first time, this complex web of alliances and ambitions dragged basically the entire globe into one conflict. The world's major powers split into two huge teams. On one side, you had the Allied powers, think Britain, France, and Russia, and squaring off against them were the Central Powers, led by Germany and Austria-Hungary. This thing was way bigger than a European dispute. It was a global split that pulled in nations from literally every continent.
Now let's get into what made this war so different and just so horrifying. It wasn't just the sheer scale of it all. It was the way fighting itself was changed, forever.
This war was really defined by a brutal collision of old-school tactics and terrifying new technology. For the first time ever, you had industrialized weapons like tanks, airplanes, machine guns, and even horrifying chemical weapons like poison gas, all of it unleashed on a massive scale. Warfare had just entered a new, mechanical, and way, way deadlier age.
And the result of all this new weaponry? A human cost that is, well, it's almost impossible to even wrap your head around. We're talking about roughly 30 million soldiers either killed or wounded. An entire generation was just decimated by the cold efficiency of these new killing machines.
And for the soldiers who actually survived those initial attacks, life became a total nightmare in the trenches. Just try to imagine it. A world of constant mud, rampant disease, swarms of rats, and the non-stop, paralyzing fear of the next artillery shell or a sniper's bullet.
You see, this war didn't just end. It shattered the old world order. The consequences that came after the fighting were just as dramatic as the war itself, completely redrawing the map of the world as we knew it.
The scale of the political change was just staggering. 4, count 'em, 4 of the world's great long-standing empires simply vanished. They ceased to exist. The German, the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, and the Russian empires all collapsed under the weight of the war, and this created a massive power vacuum that would go on to define the rest of the 20th century.
So, okay, this all brings us back to our big question. This was mainly a European catastrophe, right? So how on earth did it become the defining moment for the United States? Let's trace that journey.
America's path was, well, pretty dramatic. At first, President Wilson and the American public were all in on staying neutral. But then, a couple of major provocations forced their hand. First, Germany's submarines started sinking civilian ships, including American ones. Then came the Zimmermann telegram. This was a secret German message, intercepted by the British, that basically proposed an alliance with Mexico against the United States. That was the final straw. In 1917, America jumped in with the Allies, and the arrival of fresh American forces helped to break the brutal stalemate on the Western Front. And it was from the ashes of old Europe that America emerged as a new and truly formidable world power.
So, after all of that complexity, all of that horror, how can we possibly boil this down? What's the single most important thing to take away from this monumental shift in world history?
If you take away just one thing from all of this, let it be this final thought. World War I was the first global fire that burned the old world to ashes and gave birth to modern America. It was the end of one era and the violent, definitive beginning of a whole new